Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WAFT, Champaign, 90.1 on your FM dot.
And Dave on the board. Today is Sunday, July the 1st. This is the first day of July. The 4th of July is coming up this Wednesday, and this is the Prairie Monk program, WEFT's weekly look at rails, trails, greenways, and other conservation-type things.
So, busy week this week. On Sunday after the program, I went to the Quaker House and we memorialized Robin Mittenthal, who was in his 40s and passed away with a tree falling on him at his little farm in Wisconsin. And he had been grown up in Champaign-Urbana, well known in the community, a big guy with a small family, and was in the process of developing a farm where you would pick your own, whether it's berries or whatever. And so lots of memorials, little memories here and there, people who live next door or near or had encountered Robin and his sister, who is now in Norway, married and with children. So this is a small family that we've watched grow, and so after quite a few representations and some delay because people don't know quite what to say, and I was really appreciative of that, but eventually holding hands and then getting together with food and people, many of whom we haven't met for many years, that are part of a broad family of people who do interesting things. On Monday, Ron Sleater came. We went to Rantoul to do more timely spot herbiciding of teasel. I took down a mulberry tree or two, but I also was putting 100-foot markers on the road, the old road behind the prairie, so that people can go and find a site if they have to. Interestingly, the Natural History Survey people had been there, found crawdad holes where snakes often dwell, and sometimes even different species of snakes will hibernate in such holes, but they seem to use them as a place. And if you put down a cover of 3 feet by 3 feet of cardboard or plywood, then the snakes will be under there, and they're looking for mice that might be in there too. And so you can often lift up those boards and find creatures underneath. They're looking for a snake that is small, but rather it hasn't been seen for quite a time. So they think that our little pocket prairie may be a good site because it has a nice little stream that comes through, and that attracts the crawdads. So the markers, I hope, will extend to a grid, so that if you need to find a hybrid plant at a certain location, we can give you the north, south, east, and west. We're not really into geosystem yet, but that is another way of locating your site, and probably more efficient than a grid. That the two help each other, and the grid is more understandable by people who are not into geographic information services. This week we learned that Susan Taylor, longtime supporter, had fallen over. She had wisely remained in place because she knew that if you fall, and then it's likely if you get up and try to get out of your fall, you may break a bone. She didn't break any bones, but she is in therapeutic restoration at the moment, and we wish her well. I was reminded at that time that I've recently had 3 friends who have fallen off bicycles. People who've been riding bicycles all their lives intend to continue to do so. It's part of their philosophy. And that sometimes can be awkward because as you age, you lose your stability, and that can lead to a bump or something, and you fall off. And your bicycle pedals are at least a foot off the ground, and you may land on something that's in your pocket. It really helps to assess your situation. I don't go out there and ride a bicycle on the Kickapoo Trail for that reason. It's I enjoy riding bicycles, but that and dancing are things that where you can happen to do things that are untoward for your bodily concern. It takes a while if you have to have a titanium bone instead of a regular bone, for the muscles to reconstitute, and so that's where the therapy comes in. On Tuesday, or even before that on Sunday night, I extracted a lot of cardboard from a dumpster across the road where there's development. And that went out with, WEFT has a contract with ABC, and ABC takes cardboard. And so for 3 weeks in a row, I've been putting a small mountain of cardboard outside, and they've been picking it up. It's pretty amazing what amount of cardboard, let alone wood or pallets or all sorts of things, go out in the dumpster. Part of it is that we have no commercial recycling center anymore where you can take that sort of stuff without having to go a long way. Our 2 major recycling centers, Max and Movers, are quite a ways out of town, so you can't just walk your materials in. You have to have transport, and you have to have the time to do it. The contractors are meeting a deadline. They have to do things quickly, and even though you probably would be lucrative for the cardboard salvage people to offer a small amount of money to buy cardboard, because there is a margin of income there. That means that if you sell a ton of cardboard, you do get some return for it. But I don't think that negotiation is in vogue. There are several things you might think about that. One is that if you're doing sustainability and you're doing LEED buildings, you're looking for awards for doing sustainability, especially at the university level. You tend to use materials that are recyclable, so that helps. You also can work with a city. In some situations, a city will require that the recyclable materials go out, and not out to the landfill, but out to recycle. That means that you write into the contract that the recyclable materials should be preserved, and that costs the building developer money to do that, and in turn the owner. But it's a way of responsibly getting rid of the materials. You can go to agencies that have a big floor, open floor, where they dump materials and sort them out. That is an extra cost, and that is a cost that probably, if it's used, will be attributed to the contractor. There are materials that we know about that are uniform, and one of them is especially is concrete road asphalt, road pack goes into large salvage areas on Lincoln Avenue where they can be reused, and that has been happening here. When dirt goes out, it goes to a place where dirt can be reused. So several thoughts there. You have to realize that the contract across the road is a rather small building compared with huge developments, and that if this is going on across the country, it's really a massive amount of recyclable materials. And there is a possibility that if you're at the landfill, you have a bunch of people who are often on the poverty side of the financial blessing, and they often have little houses around the landfill, and you can they can sort. And we do have those in occasional places. An elder group will get together and salvage steel and copper and other items. But you have to have an organization. You have to be able to cut that material into a serviceable length so it can be put into a Bessemer furnace and utilized. You have to have road access. You have to be able to work with the bulldozer in all sorts of weather. And there's an insurance problem there if you're doing that in the United States. Most of this sort of salvage goes on in undeveloped countries where it's very meaningful to get those materials, and that's what their small homes in the background are involved in. Some of those materials, like corrugated iron or things that can be used to create their homes. So we have to think about what we do with our salvage and how we organize it. And part of the problem is that the Champaign had a salvage over around by where Kmart used to be, where the city has its garage. There were a number of dumpsters, and people would come there and put in their cardboard, their cans. At the moment, cans are just going to the landfill the same way as they used to. But that attracted people from other districts that didn't pay tax money in Champaign. So $170,000 was spent on doing that. It was sociologically rather impressive, because people would get there and they would talk and they became friends even if they didn't know each other. But Champaign closed that out. So we don't have that sort of facility. They do pick up from private homes and businesses to some extent, but recycling of those materials is very helpful. Sometimes they're actually usable. This very week there was furniture that involved slots for putting 8 by 10 sheets of paper in it, and for different members of a community. And it was sitting by the dumpster, and I'm sure it was almost brand new, but associated with an 8 by 4 foot piece of compressed board, which is very heavy and not always enjoyed by people who are saving furniture. But both those items, I think, went to the landfill. You also have to know that when you load a load lugger, there's a back door, and you can take a wheelbarrow and push your material to the end. You can load it carefully. A lot of the material I see going out is unbroken down. That means that a volume of a certain amount of air gets a free ride 40 miles to the landfill, and that gives me the creeps, because it could be, most boxes are made so that they can be broken down. All the beer industry is very good at it. It just is heavy enough to not drop a bottle of wine or something like that, but it's enough to hold the box together, but it's enough to be able to pull it with your hands and break that box down. If not, carry a box knife and deal with it. If you have a coffee dispenser and it has a plastic insert, pull the plastic insert out, and then that box is fairly heavily put together because it has to be used for dispensing the coffee. Then you need a mat knife or a box knife, preferably, to break that down and leave it flat so that other people can use the load lugger, and so that we don't have to send air to the landfill. I think that's enough on that topic. This week we've been discussing the possibility of doing blogs. Bill Saylor and David have been very helpful in putting up this program onto Vegas, and with the aid of Urbana Public Television. And the suggestion is that if we have a number of different topics, and they're not easily accessible on YouTube, this program goes up on YouTube. So the wise thing to do is to sort out some of the topics, like I've just been talking about dumpsters. That might be a topic. So we've been interested in blogs, video blogs. So we video our program, but if we drop material into our program, it's usually small amounts, because I say something for a very short time, and there's only time to put one picture in for 20 seconds or something like that. But usually these topics have a photographic record which is much more extensive. So then we're looking at blogs that might be half an hour long. They might be 3 minutes long if you have a very specific interest. They might be exciting in the terms of that they are very positive. So this week, I tried doing a blog through the 2nd Street detention pond, and we look at it because you folk out there with cell phones and video cameras and still cameras can do a lot to do your own blogs and send them by a link to friends and relatives. You may send them up on YouTube, and perhaps they have access with a link to YouTube. They may go up on Urbana Public Television. They may be available on places like the Urbana Free Library. But there are some limitations if we want to do it quickly. Now, this is mid-June, mid-July. The prairie is very interesting because that's when it flowers. It takes a while for it to get underway. The grasses are still clump grasses, but they're starting to fruit. So the fruiting bodies are there. So we need to suggest to people who enjoy walking around the detention pond that this sort of material is available for them to enjoy. Just go and sit near to a bunch of purple coneflowers or butterfly weed or cardinal plants or purple clover, and just enjoy. So I walked down, and basically I was walking to a script, and we then had to decide whether this was good enough to promulgate. Well, I went through it, and David went through it, and we figured that apart from one or two items that didn't seem to count, then we could go with that as it is. We had to think about the sound. I was speaking into a camera. I was speaking into a camera without a lavalier. I was speaking into a camera without a lavalier, without a sock on the lavalier that will help you if you have to deal with wind. So the sound is a little in the distance. It's rough and tough, but it's adequate to let people know what is happening with the prairie that's been planted, and it's about 5 years old now. About 4 or 5 years old, the yellow coneflower comes out. So we need those images. And one of the things we have to do is be able to not send you silly by doing too many zooms. We have to take the general image and bring you to the specific flower. That's hard to do, because if you're on autofocus, it focuses the background, not the flower. So there are some technologies that we have to gather up to be able to go into a menu and select a focus that is just so. And it's on the flower or the insect. Or yesterday I was looking at someone watching a small snake. It was about 6 inches long, and it just is ideal for that sort of situation. So we have to think about our own technology, how we do it, and then we have to render it. So I got there this week, and almost got there, and my technology was not quite good enough with Vegas. I tried to save it, and I lost it, and so we have to go back and do it again. But rest assured, it seems that we have to be into an era when we have blogs about specific topics. They have to be well annotated. They have to, if they're going to be in the Urbana Free Library, you have to be able to look at a set of sheets and find out if you're going to talk about carpentry or roofing or roads or waterways. That topic should be easy to access, and it should be a blog, and we get that sort of research information from the Prairie States Conservation Coalition, which has been running around Chicago and figuring out who wants to listen to what and how. Sometimes we have to get onto Facebook. We have to get on to Twitter. It's a different world. So we went trying, and that's good.
Can I jump in for just a second here? I can tie a bunch of these things together. I have a feeling that some of the things you're talking about are kind of on the inside for some of the listeners, and I was going to take maybe 2 minutes and tell them what it is that we've been talking about here. A couple of years ago, I got to go on campus and give a talk on the subject of the digital divide. The University of Illinois is a hotbed for the newest and greatest, the shiniest technology that's out there. And I said, it's great that you've got all that stuff, and hopefully you go out into the rest of the world and you use it, but you should realize radio doesn't become obsolete just because we have computers in every home now, and you know, every library has 50 of them, and so on. So keep utilizing the old technology for what it's good for. What Dave is talking about is the opposite. We've got the new technology. We can create videos that we put online, so that instead of just listening to the radio and hearing Dave talk about how beautiful the prairie plants are taking to being at the detention pond, he can take videos as he walks around and has, you know, these videos from his own cell phone. Think about this. He's carrying around a camera with microphones in it that he can use to make a recording of the video and the sound of these prairie plants. And anything else that he wants to. We can put those together and put those online. So if all you want to do is tune in on Sunday mornings at 11 and hear Dave talk about these things, that's all you need to do. The technology's there, you've got it, and go ahead and use that. But if you're interested in seeing some of this stuff, we will put a link online. If you go to YouTube, you type in The Prairie Monk, you'll go right to Dave's videos, and the videos that have these special extra vlog videos that Dave is talking about. Vlog is short for a video blog, which is short for all the information that you put up online. If you want access to these extra videos that Dave is creating, it'll be right there at YouTube along with Dave's shows. So you can go directly to them and you can see what the prairie plants look like. And if Dave has video of the cardboard boxes that he's been packaging up, whatever he puts together in these videos, you can see online. But once again, the radio program will always be here. So if that's all you need, that's great. We'll always be here too, for you to tune in on Sunday mornings at 11. The end.
Yeah, well, that's pretty helpful. But one of the things is we can send you a link. If we have a database for our contacts, we can get to you with a link. And I'm not quite sure how you put a link up, but David does, and he knows. And we will put a link up with the Banner Free Library. But just by happenstance, Jason is on vacation for a week, so that means it doesn't get to be immediate. And some of these things are what we want to say immediately. Okay, well. Then, partially during the week, we had a building inspection, and you have to understand that a lot of the things we do, like buying old railroad beds and little prairies here or there, and encouraging groups like the Grand Prairie Friends and other agencies that look after prairies, we somewhat have neglected our home body. We were here when this was a dead central business district, and all the major institutions had run up to the mall, and it was I could have at that time bought 2 buildings for $45,000, and now the same buildings will probably sell individually, not together, for more like $150,000 or $2,000. $200,000. So we're gentrifying, and people look at what we were doing 30 years ago. We walked into old buildings that used to be owned by the grub companies in Gravia, and they came here in the 56s, and then they went through letterpress and linotypes and rotogravure and then to computerization completely. And now they've closed that. They don't print it here anymore. The printing press has been taken out and salvaged, and the buildings have been bought and probably will go into apartments. So the character of Market Street is changing. Do we take down those buildings? Well, none of us own the buildings that we gaze at, but a little bit of community involvement would suggest that sometimes gazing at these things would change things a little bit. We've lost our pocket prairie. It's going to be a beer garden for the beer company where you pour your own. Your pouring is computerized, and you can check with a 2-ounce check 25 different craft beers, and then take a door out onto what used to be the pocket prairie, and enjoy music and camaraderie. So we're very glad to see that building has been occupied. It has been empty for a long time. But that will be a different development. The place was an agency for Willie's Night and Jeep many years ago, and it had display windows all around the first floor. And then the mechanics were accessed. You ran your small car onto a water hoist, and it went upstairs, and the mechanics would work on it there. So it has a concrete floor. There will be 6 or 7 apartments up there, and so the windows are being changed, and that's where we come into the cardboard situation. I'm just thinking what I was. Oh, I was back on building inspection. So our building has not been improved recently. So there's been various changes over the years. We and WEFT had an artificial front of 3 feet added, might even be 5 feet. WEFT took that what I refer to as an abortion off the front. We didn't have the money to do that, but we have a tuck pointing problem there that is worth $6,000, and we have windows at the back of our buildings that are falling out and need attention for about $3,000. So we haven't been able to meet the dictates of repair. So we also have tended to look after railroad beds and prairie preservation sites around that are somewhat more urgent, because we're down to 0.01% of remnant prairie, and that's really pretty serious. So often when we are working locally in a situation, we gather up recyclable materials, often out of dumpsters, but also from people who bring them in, even sometimes from out of state, because they don't know where to go. Sometimes they don't have the time or money or energy to preserve them, so you'll pull something like 30 shirts out of the dumpster that are still on hangers. It's amazing what goes into the dumpster when the university finishes degree programs. So we have that sort of thing. I've just been looking at solo cups. There are so many people who buy 100 solo cups and use 24 of them, and the rest goes in the garbage. And that is plastic that goes to the landfill, where X number of people, including mayors and politicians at the state level and engineers, have been concerned about an aquifer. And so how dare we take that and put it in the landfill? Well, fortunately now some of the recyclables can be recycled. Styrofoam can be recycled. I see so much styrofoam going into the landfill, and we don't need to do that. It can be compacted. You take your styrofoam to DART, which used to be Solo Cup, in a banner, and they compacted into 45-pound ingots that can be commercially sold to jobbers. So we can do this if we want to. But in the process, the building next door has a lot of inflammable materials. So justifiably, we're being checked out for that. I appreciate the effort, and lots of photographs. And if we're lucky, we may be able to work with the city to restore the front and back to a building. And the alternative is that we may get gentrified. As we think about this, the taxes go up and up and up. So that can get you out of town. Things like drop ceilings may not be commensurate with modern first floor office space or shopping space. So So how could you adapt that? We have a sprinkler system, but sometimes our sprinklers are too close to items that we put near them, and so they can't spread out and shower. So this week was very interesting in that we had a visit from the city, and we must be very careful or we'll lose our status in a gentrifying downtown. Now you have to wonder, couldn't you do all you were doing in Oregon or out of town or somewhere else? Well, yes, you could. But the interesting fact about the Pocket Prairie has been that it has educated a lot of people about the prairies that they didn't know much about. That includes overseas people. We used to do silkscreen printing, and those silkscreen prints have ended up in places overseas. The like of Neil Bohr's son was here, and so he took a print from here to Europe, and just that sort of thing goes on. You need it to happen in a niche in downtown. You need Chicago with the water company that's right next to the Sears building. It's there. It's got character. We need that. So how do we work with cities to say, leave us a niche to work with? It also requires that we have a broader spectrum of people involved in doing this, and that's not always easy. It's not always easy to get boards that will be committed to this sort of thing. If you look at all the naturalists that there have been in the U.S., for instance, other countries too, it's usually a very small group of Muirs and Theodore Roosevelts and whatnot that have done some of the things that have been necessary for saving natural areas. We probably will say some more about that in the future, but we have to reform, and that includes little things like putting a washer in a faucet that's leaking. People will come by a sink and there's a drip. And what are you doing with that drip? That's wasting water out of the aquifer. So we have to do some small things as well as big things. And that's where we are right now. Let me see the time. 15 minutes. Okay. So this week we had a wonderful wedding at the Calyx organization, and it's behind Allerton Park. It's put together by Bill Taylor, whom West knows very well. He had a lot to do with putting together WEFT. We even had a lot to do with the early acquisition of WEFT. Came here about the same time as we were here, looking at 4 buildings in a row that were dead. And so we encourage WEFT to come here. I can remember meetings associated with that. And Bill Taylor and a whole bunch of others got together and created WEFT. We don't need that sort of activity. It makes life worthwhile. It gives you a sociology of being able to understand each other. You talk to each other. Sometimes you hug each other. Not everyone wants to be hugged, so there's a different stand apart group. But we need that sort of interaction. Well, on Saturday, Christian Hamilton and Sebastian Kell. Sebastian is German background, and they got married at the Calyx Foundation. Well, Bill Taylor and Janet Kalmar got together and they took a barn from up the road and brought it down onto 25 acres that Bill bought just right behind Allerton Park. And they also later went and got a house that has potential too. But the barn has been rather wonderful, and people get married there, and people have bands there. There's a hog shoot festival each year. I think they've had 8 already. The hog shoot name comes from the fact that just down the road there's a little bridge, and it was used as a chute for loading pigs that were running around on river lands that were let loose and then later collected for sale. And the hog chute was used as a chute, so that gave the name to the band. This is rather wonderful. They have parking lots. And yesterday, Christian, whom I know better than Sebastian, is there. Bill and Karen and Jan had 2 children, Adrian and Maya, who many of you probably know. And all in unison, more or less, this group of people who had to do with the co-op, had to do with the art theatre, had to do with the Oregon Street Meet, just getting people together on various different dimensions, the Independent Media Center. A lot of these organizations are different from the normal structure, and but they're important. There were over 100 people at this wedding, and there were people that were meeting each for the first time, but there were also people who knew each other from long since. I thought that was rather wonderful, and I hung around and took a photograph here and there, and it's very near to 4 miles of prairie that we have on a railroad bed, very nearby. I'm almost tempted. We're at the moment being adjudicated by a land trust that's led by Bruce Hannon, to see if they would want to take over this sort of resource that we've bought mainly for prairie. And just last night I was thinking that this almost is a job for, not a job, but an event for a nearby group of people who are alternative enough that if you put a trail in on that 4 miles, it wouldn't have to be 100 feet wide, so you didn't have any prairie left. It's a different way of thinking. So at the moment in my evil mind, I'm thinking about how we might institute this sort of organization to be somewhat formal. The wedding ceremony was somewhat formal. People in long dresses and dressed up, and you need that. You need to be able to work with, for instance, the Natural History Survey. This week we had people at Rantoul that are putting down little covers for snakes that I talk about every once in a while. You need that sort of formality. You need people who can get together on a number of different dimensions, and you need to save an elevator. You need to save an old industrial factory that could be recycled. And sometimes it takes an alternate group to be looking at that. Being at a celebration and meeting people was rather wonderful for me, because I was just thinking of what's the next step? How do we work with that 4 miles of prairie? It's loaded with invasive trees that need to be removed. We need a population of people that's prepared to get out there and work at it. So what might we be able to do? How do we infuse that in the same category as a land trust?
6 minutes.
It's not easy stuff because it involves a lot of people who have been used to having monolithic institutions. The city of Champaign has probably about 6 departments, and they're all reasonably separate. And sometimes their regulations overlap. So how do we deal with that formality which has to conform to city regulations, state regulations, federal regulations, but also infuse the sometimes weird, sometimes different alternate thinkers who are out there in numbers. And if you go to the farmers market, you'll find them there. Those people, you'll find that they come with honey, they come with fruit and vegetables, they come with ideas that are different. It might be pottery or jewelry or politics. Or how do we get to do that sort of informality? In some cases, I'm working with people who are used to gathering up a group of people, making a decision and getting a job done, which is a very traditional way of doing things and very, very helpful, because sometimes our alternative groups are debating with each other for a long, long time before a decision gets made, and then there's always an objection. So how do we bring together the thinkers who are traditionally fairly formal? Usually there's an innovator somewhere. I'm thinking of Tim Nugent as looking at wheelchair people. And they gradually, it takes 20, 30, 40 years to make rules that could be obeyed, that allow people in wheelchairs to contribute to society with fun and interest without being too morbid about their situation. So sometimes those rules get interpreted so that they're very, very strict. And so we have to figure out how to work within the community to bring those sorts of interests together. And over, the conservation groups, at least that I go to, fairly dramatically interested in people talking to each other. And they say, not in teams. You don't introduce this topic to 20 people in a room. You gradually start to talk to people one to one. And by talking, you have to get used to each other. And sometimes getting used to each other means you have to ask questions of each other. You may be on totally different wavelengths, but you're really on the same wavelengths if you get to know. But it takes a while back and forth to figure out who's thinking what and how and where and how can you get together. Compromise is not always the end point. It has often been touted as the end point, but compromise, if you're down to 0.01% of the remnant prairies, there's no room for compromise. That should have been thought of when farmers were taking out the prairie for good soil and not thinking about the genetics of needing a biochemistry in some small ant that is dependent on some small plant. So there needs to be an ecology there. Likewise, there needs to be an ecology in a city situation. So there was a landscape planner named Lewis who was respected at the world level as a suggester that cities should have a titular head that brings together these departments. And he was very criticized locally for doing that and suggesting that. It's almost like suggesting that you're taking over and making decisions for other people. But it was just the fact that the person who's the fire control person needs to know that you have had to do something to get the Kickapoo Trail into action. It's moved into different directions. It's moved with change of policy. But there needs to be a realization at that specific physical plant level, what have you, that there is something more important than the rule. But then we have to figure that we have to meet rules that are set up for good reason, and we have to bend over backwards to do that. And so the visit of city officials reminds us that we need to move in that improvement direction. Oh, okay. This is the end of my rant at the moment, and it's been a busy but enjoyable week. And enjoy your heat out there. Survive. Don't use too much air conditioning. Get out and look at your local prairie as it is in the 2nd Street detention pond. Okay, thanks for listening. Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WEFT Champaign 90.1 on your FM dial.
And Dave on the board. As always, the views and opinions expressed are solely those of the speakers and no one else.